Alright, so chapter 1 is going to be all about HTML and CSS. Now if you have some knowledge of HTML and CSS, or at least know what it is and what it's used for, then that's great. If you have no clue how HTML works or what it is, then it's not going to be impossible for you to learn it through this series. It's actually really easy to learn, so just stick with it and try to follow along, and I'm sure you'll do fine. Alright, so what is HTML? It stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it's really important to explain the difference between a markup language and a programming language. A markup language is used for the physical markup or the presentation of a website. HTML is not used for logic or programming or if statements, loops, nothing like that. An example of a programming language would be JavaScript, which is a client-side programming language, PHP, Ruby on Rails, or Ruby in general, are all programming languages. HTML, XML, XHTML are all markup languages. And these markup languages work with sets of tags, which are very easy to understand. And here we have a set of tags. We have an opening H1 tag and a closing H1 tag, and what this is a heading tag. In HTML we have H1 all the way through H6, H1 being the biggest, the largest format, and the H6 being the smallest. So if we put in between here, this is a heading, it's going to display in our browser with the H1 formatting, which is the largest font, the largest heading font. And each browser has its own set of default values for how big an H1 tag is. But you can use CSS to change it to however you want. You can have an H1 tag be the same size as a paragraph tag if you wanted to. So that's all dynamic. You can change that. Whoops. So tags usually have an opening and closing tag, much like the H1 here. But then we have tags that don't need to be fully closed. We don't need to have a second instance of the tag name or the element name. And the image tag is a good example. You can see the image tag just has the opening bracket or less than sign, and then the image text of the tag, and then we have the slash, and then the closing greater than sign. So that's acceptable, and there's a few others, line breaks, horizontal rules, there's a few others, and we'll go over that. We'll go over what the difference is when it comes to that. So, and this format is mostly used in XHTML, which is just a more strict version of HTML. And we'll go over that as well. So here's a little bit of history, kind of boring, but it's good to know. HTML 2.0 was published in November of 1995. And that was as the IETF RFC 1866. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but it wasn't recommended from the W3C until 1997 when HTML 3.2 was published. And then in December 1997, HTML 4.0 was published, and then in 1999 HTML 4.01 was published. And in the 2000s we had some other markup language released, like XHTML, which is basically a more strict version of HTML, XML, which is different in that it's made to work with data and not so much browser presentation. And then we also have DHTML, which I don't have too much experience with, but it's something like a XHTML, just different standards. HTML5 was a candidate recommendation of the W3C in December of 2012, so this is very recent. HTML5 is fairly new, and it is becoming more popular as all the browsers are now they now support HTML5, because there was a couple years where different browsers only did certain functions that HTML5 offers. But nowadays, in 2013, using HTML5 is absolutely fine. Now here's the document structure of a very simple, I guess the most simple HTML document that you can create. So, like I said, we have the tag structure. We always need the opening HTML tag, and then we have the opening head tag. And in the head section, this is the closing head tag. In this section is where we put our page title. This is where we can put our site keywords, links to CSS and JavaScript files. This is stuff that won't show on the browser. It won't show in the browser window. The page title will show up at the top of a browser in the little box area, or on a tab. If you open a tab and you visit the website, the title will be in that tab. The body, however, is where all the content for the website is placed. And you can see in my body tags, all I have is an H1 heading, and then I have a paragraph. So that's all that's going to display on the web page. Alright, so here's some examples of some common tags. Like I said, we have the headings tag H1 through H6. Paragraph it's just formatting a paragraph. An image, we can insert an image. We'll need to add some attributes to point to the image, but we'll go over that very soon, because each tag can have different attributes. A line break, what this does is just puts a space in, and you can add them. You can have as many as you want. You can add 3 line breaks, which will make a larger space below that element. Unordered lists and ordered lists. The only difference here is that the ordered lists have a number in front of each item, and unordered list just has a bullet or a dot. List tags, these go inside of the lists, and you can have each line will be a list. And I'll be displaying all this to you in this chapter. It's a little hard to tell you, and it's a lot easier to just show you. So we also have a bunch of new HTML5 tags, and this is only a few of them. We have a header tags where we can put all our header content, maybe our logo or a slogan, stuff like that. And we also have a footer tag where we can put our footer menus and SSL seals and stuff like that. The sidebar, the A-side tag is basically used for sub-content in a sidebar. Navigation, usually you'd have a unordered list in this area, which would be your navigation menu for your site. And I don't like to use these tags more than once, even if I have more than one menu. Section, basically just a section of text, maybe a news article or a blog post, something like that. Okay, so let's see. Now we'll talk a little bit about implementing CSS, and like I said, you can link to external style sheets in the head area of your website, and you can also add style, inline style. So let me just go back to our structure layout. So we can do this. We can open a style tag, and then in between here we can put all our CSS. I'm not going to put it there because I haven't taught you CSS yet, but you can do this, and you can also, let me just get back to where I was, you can also just include a link to a style sheet. So we have the link tag, and then the rel attribute, which would be style sheet, the href attribute, which is a link attribute would point to the CSS file. So in this case, it's pointing to style.css. And then we just have the type, which is text/CSS. So then we could add all our CSS in this file here. You also can use inline style right in the tag you're using, or the element. So say we have a paragraph, we can add a style attribute, and that will allow us to put CSS values in. So you can see here we have color red, and the values, they're separated by label, I guess you could call it, and then a value. So color red, and then we have other kinds of let's see, we can do like padding, which is the space around an element. We could say 5 pixels, and that would give a padding around the paragraph of 5 pixels. And like I said, it's a lot easier to show you, so we'll be doing that in this chapter. So creating an external style sheet, like I said, right here where we're pointing to style.css, this is something you would see in a external style sheet. So we have the body element, and we can display that, we can add styling to that, and the body surrounds everything. So whatever you put in the body tag, whatever styles, is going to apply to basically the entire area of the website. So the font we can set to Arial, so that will make everything in the body, it'll make all the fonts Arial. The background color, we have a hexadecimal value, which is white, 6 Fs, preceded by a pound sign would be white. If we had 6 zeros, that would be black. But you can also use just the color. We can just say white, and that'll be the same thing. Font size, we're setting the font size to 14 pixels for the entire site. And we don't have to style default elements like a body or a paragraph. We can actually add a class or an ID to an element. So we have a paragraph tag here, an opening paragraph tag, and we have an attribute called class, and this we're equaling to my class. So this paragraph has a class of my class. Now we can style that just like we did here with the body by calling the class. So P, which is the paragraph, dot my class, and we have a background attribute of light gray. So this hexadecimal value is light gray. Okay, so what'll happen here is this paragraph, whatever we have in here, is going to have a background of this color because it's the class. Now we can also use IDs. So we could say paragraph ID equals my ID. And then if we want to style that, we need to do, instead of a dot, which represents a class, we need to have a hashtag or a pound sign. And then we would put my ID. So this would do the same thing. This would change this paragraph's background to light gray. So I know it can be a little hard to wrap your head around, but once you get it, it's extremely easy. So CSS3 gives us a bunch of new features. We're not going to go through too many of these in the lessons or in the code that we create, but I'll just go through some of the important popular features. The first is media queries, and media queries are great because they allow us to have fully responsive designs or responsive templates. We can say, for instance, apply this section of CSS to the website only if the browser window or the display screen is, say, 500 pixels. So let's say 100 to 500 pixels. And that would give us certain styling for that size only. And that makes it really easy to develop sites for mobile phones as well. You can have the same site but have it displayed differently on a phone, on a smartphone, than on a desktop computer. So that's what Media Queries does, and we'll get a little into that later on. Rounded corners is something that I like because I used to hate having to use background images to create the rounded corner effect, and you used to have to carefully slice out rounded corners from your image, from your Photoshop PSD or whatever, and then write a bunch of CSS just to have rounded corners on a box. Well, in CSS3 we can use the border radius property, and we can make anything rounded, and we can change the radius to whatever, 5 pixels, 10, 20 pixels. So that's a really handy feature of CSS3. Text effects, basically we can have text shadow and stuff like that. I don't really use it too much. Animations, we can have CSS3 animations. We can move things across the screen. We can basically change the styling property through a period of time. So we could change, let's say, the background color of a box from red to green slowly. We could actually have a certain speed for it to gradually change. So we can have some nice simple CSS3 animation. Colors and gradients, we now don't have to use background images to have gradients. We can actually apply that right through the CSS. We have pseudo classes which allow us to better select certain elements. For instance, if we have a list, an unordered list with five entries, 5 lines, we can target, say, the third line or the third list element and style that by itself and not any of the other list elements. So that's something else that's really cool in CSS3. Alright, so that's it. That was a very brief introduction. We have a lot more to go through, and like I said, I'm more of a hands-on person, and I think I can explain this a little better if I can just show you rather than just have you look at some PowerPoints. So I will see you in the next section, and we'll get started.